Hey everybody on YouTube, welcome back to my channel. It's me, Rachel, the Student Witch. How are you doing? No matter where you are in the world, I hope that you and your loved ones are safe and are doing well. Man, what a time to be alive. So I'm here drinking some wine because it is cycle day 1 and my lower back hurts. I'm sore, I'm tired, I'm moody, and I'm stuck inside like everybody else. And it's after 5 p.m. so I'm going to enjoy a glass of wine. FYI, wine, if it's a good quality wine, or a decent wine at least, turns my lips purple. So as I drink more and more of this wine, as this video progresses, there is a chance that my lips are gonna get like dark purplish color. But that only happens when it's a good quality wine. And I'm not talking necessarily about the price of the wine, I'm talking about the flavor and the bold richness of the flavor. I've noticed that like cheap wine, even cheap red wine doesn't do that. So that's my litmus test to determine if a wine is good or not, is how much color it, changes on my lips. In case anybody's curious, and I think this is available in the United States. I live in Santiago, Chile right now. This is called Bicicleta Reserva, and it's a Carmenere by Cono Sur, and it's a pretty decent price, and it's a good quality, and it's delicious. And when in Chile, drink Chilean wine, right? So cheers. So this is part 2 of my exploring personified deity, exploring the spirit model of Magick video. And oh, by the way, if you hear noise or voices in the background, my partner, he's working from home now. He's lucky enough to be able to do that, and so he's in a meeting right now, a Zoom meeting, so you might hear like the keyboard clacking, or you might hear his voice in the background, so that's what that is. I'm also here, let me see if you can see her. Let me pick up the camera so I can show you. Luna. She's hanging out with me. I have an old bed sheet kind of draped over our couch just to control the Luna hair. Since no one's coming over, I don't have to care about, how presentable the house is, right? So I might as well put an old bed sheet on the couch just to control her fuzziness, because she's been sleeping more and more on the couch as the weather cools more and more down. She wants a nice, cozy, warm place to nap for hours and hours and hours a day. Such a cat. Huh. It's a rough life. It's a very rough life. So yeah, so this is part 2 of my explorations with the spirit model, and I rewatched part 1 that I recorded way back in the end of January, but I didn't actually upload it until March. And I'll have that linked up here in the corner. I'm going to have a few videos linked up here in the cards that might interest you if you're interested in these kind of topics. So I'll have that one linked up here for sure. But I covered like my ideas about atheism, and I'm going to go into that a little bit more in depth now that I'm kind of rounding the corner from atheism and kind of switching my mindset to a more polytheistic mindset. That doesn't mean that I would necessarily call myself a polytheist or use any word with the word theist in it, because it just grates on me, and I'll get into that in a few minutes, I guess. I talk about my Catholic background, and that's why I kind of avoided working with any sense of personified deity or theism in general, because I had a lot of that crap shoved down my throat from a very young age. I was baptized Episcopalian, but by the time I was of age for First Communion. I was, converted along with the rest of my family. We're converted to Catholicism, and I was really involved with the Catholic Church and youth groups and all this kind of stuff. I was super Catholic back in the day, and I'll get into more about that here in a minute too. But I talk about that in the first video. I kind of talk about why I hesitated to work with the spirit model, some of the complications that I foresaw in kind of transitioning my mindset into a more personified deity idea or practice of the spirit model. But I've been feeling the call for a dedication kind of geared practice for a while. And my original ideas were to dedicate the different seasons to the different models of magic, right? I was going to start with the spirit model for the summer, which, keep in mind, I'm in the southern hemisphere, so summer is from, December to March. And then I was going to transition for fall to the energetic model, and then the psychological model in the winter time, and then for spring, which down here is from September to December, I was going to work on the informational model, or cybernetic model. Is that another way to refer to it? It's the one that I'm least aware of or familiar with. Just as a way to kind of return to basics and like kind of deepen my practice and really figure things out, like what exactly is magic to me, what exactly is energy to me, what exactly is spirit or personified deity or disembodied intelligence to me, where do I stand with all of these different beliefs and practices, and how can I incorporate them? How can I, in that very, chaos witch, chaos magician kind of way, how can I switch and between these kind of beliefs paradigms, I guess, or magical paradigms, right? To more effectively use my magic and to gain confidence in myself as a witch and yada yada yada, right? That was my original idea. Well, we are in April, which is like a month into fall or autumn here, and I'm still with the spirit model. I'm not done with it, and so I've just kind of decided in the last month or so to just let this run its course naturally, and just allow the path to guide me as I go. I don't want to put any fixed dates or due dates on anything. I really want to allow this to just kind of organically build itself forward, and I'll just follow. I'll just let it guide me, and I'll follow. And so some of my original plans were to do an invocation ritual for my matron goddess, which is a goddess that I call either Mama Creatrix or just the Creatrix, and I'll get into her in a minute. But my original idea was to do an official kind of dedication series of rituals and then do a final invocation ritual where I invoke her and she communicates through me, right? I also wanted to dedicate lunar rituals or SBATs or, full moon or dark moon rituals to her, which I did. But then life got crazy, and then my sister came to visit with her boyfriend. And then I had to finish writing my first chapter and send that in for revisions. And then COVID-19 exploded, right? And I was having trouble connecting with my matron, because she is the figure that you see in the thumbnail image for this video. There's lots of pictures. It's, and I go into this in the part 1 of this video, so if you haven't checked that out yet, I would suggest starting in part 1 and then coming back to this video. But, as a goddess of chaos, and it's not just the destructive kind of chaos, it's the idea of interconnectivity, interdependence, butterfly effect, potentiality. You know, she is a faceless goddess, and I would always, anytime I tried to find an appropriate representation of her, I naturally kind of go for the ancient, like Ice Age, Paleolithic time frame Venus statues from 10, 20, 30,000 years ago, right? The Venus of Lespugue, I think I'm pronouncing that right. It was one of this, an ivory representation of her. That is, I have a copy of that little statue on my altar to represent her. And all of the Venus statues, they have the kind of secondary gender characteristics. Am I using that term right? Like they have enlarged breasts and large hips and thick thighs, that exaggerated feminine features, right? But they're faceless. They don't have a lot of detail, if any detail, on their face, and that is what most attracts me to them. And that's why the High Priestess card in the Mary L Tarot, I have a whole video just gushing over that card and why it's so important to me, that I made a year or two ago, probably more like 2 years ago, which I'll link up here if you're interested in a tarot discussion. But that ghostly, haunting, but powerful, generative, female, feminine, I would say, goddess presence is in that card, and it's also faceless, just like the magician in the Mary L Tarot is faceless. It's just a dark void, because she is the void. She is the potentiality, right? Well, in her more unpleasant form, she is the primordial goddess of chaos. She is, you know, the tempestuous, violent, rolling waves of the ocean, the depths of the ocean, the darkness, the unknown. And in times of crisis, like this global pandemic, it's not a very nurturing figure to work with, because yes, she allows for interconnectivity and potentiality, and she allows for beautiful things to happen, right? But she also is the same force behind this virus that allows this virus to spread, because ultimately she is indifferent. She is just the truth, the reality, the situation. Take what you will, you know. She is, currently, I'm really feeling her in her more like death, dark goddess aspect. And I don't want to pin her down necessarily as a dark goddess, because I think she's kind of beyond that whole dark versus light thing, binary, false binary, right? But right now, with so much death happening, and so much death on a scale, precisely because as a species we are so interconnected, it's staggering, it's overwhelming, and it's sad. And so I actually, I was doing some journaling. This is from back in probably mid to late March, and I wrote down this kind of prayer poem dedicated to the creatrix, that kind of just expressed how I was feeling about coming to terms with seeing death like this in a more intimate way, but also in a more global way, and just emotionally dealing with that. And so I wrote, get ready, all hail the great, terrible mother. All hail the creatrix, our cold, distant, indifferent mother, who makes everything possible, all things beautiful, and all things monstrous. Hail the divine chaos, awesome in its glory, terrifying in its power. We, your children, are humiliated in our hubris. We submit to your ineffable majesty. We prostrate ourselves at your feet and find wisdom. I was kind of reaching a point at that point when I wrote that. Specifically when I say we, your children, are humiliated in our hubris. I kind of I'm speaking at least from my perspective of seeing humanity with our skyscrapers and our vaccines and our antibiotics and our technology. You know, I think a lot of us, one of the reasons why this current pandemic has hit us so hard is because maybe as a species, especially for those of us in the developed world, right, in the global north, we thought we were above this, or we thought we were immune to something like this happening. And so when you're caught off guard by forces that are not only greater than you, but forces that you have to reckon with that force you to see how small you are. In the greater scheme of things, the only thing to do is just surrender to it. Just, you know, prostrate yourself at the feet of divine truth. Divine truth that cannot be pinned down by words like positive or negative or dark or light or hope or even despair. Divine truth, truth with a capital T, undeniable truth, objective truth, you know, it just is what it is, and after that, you gotta figure out how you're gonna deal with it, right? And so, for me, it was a moment of just, you know, the only way to gain wisdom with this, it's not running away from it, it's not escapism, it's not spiritual bypassing, it's not lashing out at each other on the internet, which, guilty, right? It is surrendering myself to it so that way I can more clearly see it, acknowledge it, and then gain wisdom from it. But those are kind of intense energies to be working with, and the world the world right now is intense. And my matron, a few weeks or days later, let me see the date. When did I write this? I think it was March 26th. It was during my kind of morning meditation / altar time, and I was reading some tarot cards, and I all of a sudden kind of felt like the Creatrix was acknowledging, like, you need a more healing energy right now. That would be better for your personal well-being. It would be a way to kind of funnel my energy towards healing and trying to push that out into the world in whichever small way that I can. You know, I needed to work with something different besides my matron. And so I have worked with other entities besides my matron on and off, principally Mother Mary. Not the Virgin Mary, but Mother Mary. And again, I grew up Catholic, so that's very familiar territory for me, right? But I felt called, and I kind of got the okay from my matron to work with the Goddess Brigid, which I haven't spoken anything about on my channel before, but she is a figure, a goddess, that has been on my radar and that I've been thinking about on and off for at least a year. I believe it was around Imbolc time. It was around St. Brigid's Day when we were still living in the Northern Hemisphere last year. Or was it the year before? It was at least around February 2019, or it could have been as early as February 2018, I'm not sure. But that is when I first kind of felt called to investigate, or to at least open myself up to her presence and her stories and her energies, right? And so on the 26th of March, I finally got the go-ahead from my matron, who will always be my matron. I actually like to think of her as the main top figure in a divine council, right? And I'm kind of building my own divine council, right? As I continue to work with more and more and feel more and more comfortable with working with, personified deity or the idea of ancestors and that kind of stuff. And so she's the head of the council. She's at the top, and then the rest of the council will be made up of the other deities that I will choose to work with. And I've had several on my radar for a long time. Ever since I was a child, I loved Artemis. And so whenever the time is right, I'll open up to her and learn about her and work with her more directly, right? But right now it's Brigid, Brigantia, I know, as a Celtic goddess. You know, the Celts weren't just in Ireland, right? But Brigid is just easier for me to say because I don't speak Irish. I can't read it, right? But it was just really interesting to kind of like open that door to her. And so I actually, on my Kindle, I downloaded, let me pull up the title, well, Tending Brigid's Flame is the name of the book. I saved it on my Amazon wish list over a year ago, and I finally just downloaded it. Tending Brigid's Flame by Lune Weatherstone. And so this is the very first book about Brigid I've ever read. As I continue to work with her, of course, I'm going to, try to get my hands on the best quality resources that I can in terms of like the folklore, the stories, the myths, what we know, what's been passed down, what we're lucky to have. I know there's a lot of trouble with like Celtic mythology and history because the spoken word was kind of privileged over the written word, and so what we do have, a lot of it was written by the Catholic Church, right? But I do want to kind of privilege Irish voices if I can, but I can't read stuff in the original Irish. I have to read stuff in English translation. I don't know Latin either, in case anything was written down, back in the day by monks or something in Latin. So if anybody has some really good resources about Brigid, let me know down below. I was pleasantly surprised and pleased by this book. This isn't necessarily an official book review or anything, since I don't really have much to compare it with because I'm just beginning here. But as a beginner, an introduction to how you can think about working with and incorporating Brigid into your practice, I think it was pretty good. I actually took, how many pages of notes? This many pages of notes. Some of this are prayers that I decided to write. Brigid being associated with poetry and a wordsmith and all that, I've just felt so called to write so many prayers. It just feels so natural. The words just come straight out. Prayers dedicated to her. And I guess I'll get into that when I talk more about how I'm kind of adapting and changing my own Catholic background to match into this. And I think I might make a video detailing that more. I'll have to be careful about how I title that video, because in the past I've gotten comments on past videos. If I'm talking about working with Mother Mary, for example, I'll get comments by people I presume who are currently Catholic telling me that I need to repent or go to hell. And so, and you can always tell when it's a Catholic telling you to go to hell versus a Protestant. It's different, and since I grew up Catholic, I can kind of see like the specific words and phrases that people use. It's like, okay, you're a Catholic. All right, thanks. If you want to think that I'm going to hell, sure, whatever. I know that hell doesn't exist. So there you go. Anyhow, so I don't want to use the word Catholic specifically in the title of that video, but basically a video I've been thinking about making in more detail is talking about how I've adapted Catholic prayers and practices and even holy days, kind of reappropriated them for my own more pagan, feminist, queer, anti-colonial spiritual practice that I'm cultivating and adapting and changing right now, right? And so Brigid, man, it's just, I've had so many, I mean, one of the reasons why I've written so many notes in here is I've also been reflecting on myself and my own experience and my own thoughts and feelings about working with Personified Deity, because for just the longest time, you know, the patriarchal Abrahamic God was the only deity that I was allowed to even acknowledge or believe in. And now as I get older and I look at Catholicism from an outsider, I mean, Catholicism, if you look at all the saints and the angels and the archangels and the different images of Mary from all over the world, you know, all over the Catholic world. I mean, it's the most polytheistic religion ever, isn't it? Oh, I'm gonna get some nasty comments from a Catholic about that, I'm sure. And so that's why it was kind of easy for me to turn towards Mary and work with her as a mother goddess, as a goddess of the sea and sky, especially. At least the images of Mary that I grew up with, that I'm most familiar with, right? The Queen of Heaven, the Mother of God, the Theotokos, I think is the Greek phrase for that, right? And so Brigid, also being Saint Brigid, right? The goddess that was through, you know, missionary and evangelizing efforts was turned into a saint, right? And how that continuous practice over the years has changed and adapted. I mean, you know, Irish laborers and migrants that came to the New World brought Brigid with them. And, you know, I have some Irish ancestry, and I can see some Irish aspects, or maybe it would be more appropriate to say Celtic cultural practices within my own childhood, growing up in Kentucky with a rich, you know, family history in Appalachia, you know, the Scots-Irish being the people who colonized, the English and the Scots-Irish principally being the peoples who colonized that part of what we call today the United States, and Appalachia as a region, you know, Eastern Kentucky especially. I have a lot of family roots there and family members there. But also on, you know, in other members of my family, if I follow their family trees, I also have a lot of Irish ancestry up in the Northeast as well, in Maine, New Hampshire, and Boston area. And so, and I've done the DNA test, apparently, according to Ancestry.com, roughly 25% of my genetic makeup, my DNA, comes from people who came from the island of Ireland. And then another 40% comes from between England, Scotland, and Wales. It doesn't really specify which parts, so I don't really know. Like, is it heavier in the Scottish versus the English, or is it more English, or whatever? But in the Celtic Isles, right, between England, Scotland, Wales, and Ireland, that's 65% of my genetic makeup. And then the rest of me comes from continental Europe and a little bit from like the Norse countries, right? So I guess I could claim some sort of ancestry to the Celts. I mean, but there's no way for me to really prove that. And I look more towards culture rather than blood, because I didn't grow up in Europe. I mean, I was born in Europe, but on a military base, and by the time I was 3, we had moved back to the United States, right? So I can't really claim any like direct ties to the cultures of where the Celts lived, right, in different parts of Europe. And so I don't really put too much weight into my genetics, right? But when I look at certain aspects of, my childhood growing up in rural Kentucky, I can see a lot of cultural influences there, right? For example, I remember kids in school teaching me and telling me that a ring of mushrooms, if you find a ring of mushrooms in the forest, and they're specifically, or they're really common close to trees, right? That's a fairy ring. That's how it was explained to me. And never ever sit or stand in the ring of mushrooms, in the fairy ring, because then the fairies will take you to the fairy realm. And that's not necessarily a good thing. And so fairies were never like cute little Disney like Fern Gully kind of idea of fairies. Fairies were potentially dangerous or tricksters or things that you had to negotiate with, or beings in the wild places that could kidnap you into the fairy realm. And the fairy realm, I always thought of it as like a different dimension or the other world, or the upside down kind of thing. And that's a cultural belief and practice, right? That was part of my, growing up. And so, this is kind of the conundrum for people who live in the New World, right? And, I can only talk for myself and for my own ancestors. My ancestors were the colonizers, right? I think my ancestors that came over to Appalachia date back to the 1700s at least. Probably my ancestors that came over to New England date back that far too. And I think my Irish ancestors, I've heard so many different versions of the story, so I don't know what's true. But I think they came over more like in the mid-1800s, a little bit more recent. But I'm a product of the New World, Sure, I have genetic ties back to Europe, but other than that, I don't really feel, I don't know. I'm a being of the Americas, of, the rich, messy, sad, but also beautiful mix of so many different cultures that is the Americas, right? Specifically North America, but now I live in South America, just all the Americas, right? And so I had to kind of sit with myself for a while and kind of work out, like, why do I feel called to work with a goddess of these peoples, these pre-Christian peoples, who we would say now were from Europe, whose descendants now either live in present-day Europe, in countries that back in the day didn't exist, right? Or whose descendants have now moved to other parts of the world, right? why am I feeling called to this, and do I have any claim to ancestry or ancestor work? And it's still a conundrum that I'm working with, but I like it. I like the fact that working with this specific personified deity has called me to think about these things in a way that, for example, working with Mary or the Creatrix didn't. And so speaking of Mary, one thing that I've done in terms of, and like I said, I think I'm going to make a more detailed video about this in the coming weeks, but one thing that has felt right with Brigid is to adapt Catholic prayers to work with her, and work with her, at least for the time being, on a more kind of, in a more dedication kind of way. And so I have, let me see if I can show you. I looked up just a common prayer to Brigid, to Saint Brigid, right? The type of prayer that you're most likely going to see on a candle to Saint Brigid or on a prayer card to Saint Brigid, right? And so I just switched out some words to make it more pagan, friendly. I've also written out a dedication to Brigid, pledging myself to her. And it's not like an official, like, I dedicate to you, you are my matron kind of thing. It's more like I'm dedicating time to work with you. Like, I pledge to acknowledge you, to approach you, to learn about you. And I also pledge to try to embody you. Brigid, not only as a goddess of the word or poetry, the hearth fire, but also the forge flame, right? A goddess of flame and water, right? But Brigid, as the saint, as that kind of manifestation of Brigid, she is also, a lot of her stories as a saint tell of her giving so much to the poor and protecting the poor and the downtrodden. And so there's a strong kind of social justice element to Brigid that I'm really attracted to, because that's something that I try to embody myself, just to, in whatever small way that I can, make a positive impact on this world and make it a more just world and more fair. And so my dedication prayer to her kind of touches on that a lot. Some of the prayers to Brigid that the author includes in the book I've also copied down because I really liked them myself. And the game changer was to finally adapt the traditional Catholic prayer of the Rosary, or at least this is a work on progress, right, to the Goddess Brigid. And so when I was a kid, for a few years, we went to a very small Catholic school when I was in elementary school for 2nd, 3rd, and 4th grade. And every day for school, we would start school with saying a decade of the Rosary. And so I was deeply steeped in, Catholic prayer of all forms. The Rosary isn't just like going around the Rosary. You have different mysteries of the Rosary. You have the sorrowful mysteries and the joyful mysteries, and you say, like, there's 5 sorrowful mysteries, and you say, a round of the Rosary for each of the different mysteries. And the mysteries were just like the life story of Jesus, seen through the eyes of Mary and her experience, right? We said the Rosary a lot. And, I could still, off the top of my head, years later, Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou among women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus. Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners now and at the hour of our death. Amen. And then Hail, Holy Queen, Mother of Mercy, our life, our sweetness, and our hope. To you we cry, O banished children of Eden, blah, blah, blah. The Salve Regina and stuff, which I've also adapted. I've adapted the prayer of St. Francis and the Salve Regina. And now I'm working on the Rosary, and I'm specifically kind of adapting and changing the wording of the Rosary to fit Brigid, right? because I have a mala bead set. I would love to someday have like a pagan rosary bead set dedicated specifically to Brigid. In the meantime, I might just go out and buy myself a cheap rosary someday, somewhere here in Santiago, and just, work with Brigid that way, just using a traditional rosary. But, instead of saying Hail Mary full of grace, blah, 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 I have Hail Brigid, Goddess of Light, the Creatrix is with thee. Blessed art thou among the gods, and blessed is your flame, the word, the hearth, the forge, and spirit. Goddess Brigid, exalted one, cloak us with love and compassion, shield us from fear and despair, heal us with your sacred waters. Amen. And I don't mind saying the word amen. And it's actually been really leaning back on those old Catholic prayers and habits, I guess, has kind of helps the transition with working with personified deity, specifically Brigid, more smooth and more familiar, and it makes it feel like it's always been a part of me, right? Because I am working with these familiar prayers and familiar actions and familiar habits, right? And I think you can start to see maybe my lips changing color. So that's been really, really interesting and really, really healing. Another really interesting aspect of working with personified deity is as you get to know and work with the deity, you are getting to know and working with yourself, right? For a long time, I was wearing an atheist hat. I kind of liken this process, of using belief as a tool as just switching out whichever hat I'm wearing. Sometimes I'm a grad student, I have to wear a grad student hat. Other times I'm a wife or a partner, so I wear that hat. Other times I'm a teacher, other times I'm this or that. And so for a while, for the last 6 months or so, I have been kind of exploring atheism in terms of my understanding of whatever might be called divine or sacred, right? But now I'm switching out the atheist hat for a more polytheistic hat, which I'm totally okay with. Like, I keep all of my hats in the closet. I can always return to that hat. I'm never going to throw away a hat once I experience it, right? Just to take this metaphor to the extreme, right? And so right now, for the time being, the atheist hat was feeling kind of too cold and distant, just like my matron was feeling kind of cold and distant as she kind of, let loose this virus onto humanity, right? And so I needed something more familiar, more tangible. And I think that's one of the greatest benefits of working with personified deity is you are consciously anthropomorphizing something that is so much greater than individual human beings or even the human species, right? You are anthropomorphizing ideas, forces of nature, concepts, archetypes, right? And as long as you're aware of the fact that you're kind of reducing them down to a familiar human image, right? As long as you're aware of that process, I think it's fine. And so for Brigid, right, she is the goddess, but also the human face that I can relate to, that I can touch, that I can experience. I hear her voice all the time. Anytime I get, a moment of inspiration, a eureka moment, something I need to write down that feels like it's a message that I'm channeling from something outside of myself, right? That's how it feels, right? I go with that feeling, and I can put her face to it. I can put her voice to it. And it makes me feel comforted. It makes me feel not quite so alone. It makes me feel like I'm part of something greater than myself. It makes me feel like I'm having a relationship with something that is close enough to me that I can almost reach out and touch. Like she's still, you know, even Personified Deity has that kind of ineffable, you know, beyond the human aspect to it, but at least it has the human face, or it can adopt that human form to get its messages across, to be a little bit less daunting or less cold and distant, right? And so, you know, Brigid for me she is the, you know, a fire and water goddess, and that, you know, really, really vibes with me because my sun sign is Sagittarius, but my rising sign is Cancer, and so I have that fire-water polarity within me as well. I really, really like... There's an ambulance, hold on. Another aspect that I really like with Brigid that the author of Tending Brigid's Flame gets into is her aspect as a hearth goddess, a goddess of the home and domestic arts and the idea of hospitality. Maybe this is my own Cancerian nature, but I've been kind of exploring and thinking about goddesses of the hearth and home for a while, like Hestia or Vesta has interested me in the past, but I love like keeping a clean home. I love being inviting. I love cooking and sharing the food with people. I love the idea of the hearth or the fireplace or the wood stove, or in our case, the little gas heater, being the center and the heartbeat and the source of warmth and comfort in the home. But Brigid is also, she is the spark, the light of truth. She is the spark of inspiration, you know, her aspect, her kind of goddess of poetry aspect, but she's also those deep, you know, red hot fires, long burning fires and coals of the forge, her kind of transformational aspect, the forge being a place of like purification and change, right? I love all of her fire associations and aspects and all of her water associations and aspects. Those feel just so comfortable and make so much sense to me. You know, from what I gather, right? The Celtic and her relationship with the Celtic viewpoint of thresholds and transitional or liminal spaces, right? Doorways and crossroads and stuff like that as spaces of change, of spaces of that simultaneously kind of demarcate and separate one thing from another, but are also fluid and changeable, right? I'm really attracted to that idea as well. There's just a lot about her that just resonates with me so much on an ancestral / cultural level, on a deep soul level, on an emotional healing kind of level. There's just so much to her. And so, this video is long. What I plan to do and what I am doing actually, from what that book said, Tending Brigid's Flame, you know, she had the 19 priestesses maintaining her eternal flame, and she was, you know, was the number 20. And so what I'm doing is, for the next 19 nights, but only on weekdays, so Monday through Friday, for 19 nights, either at sunset or after sunset, I'm going to do a small little dedication to her, and I'm going to say like some of my rosary prayers to her, just to show that I'm committed to her, to show my commitment to kind of do a 19-day long dedication work. And then on day 20, which I've calculated will be Friday, May 9th, then I'm going to do an invocation ritual or some sort of ritual, I haven't really decided, to really work with her on a deeper level. So I think I'm going to make a part 3 after May 20th when I do my more intense ritual and when I can kind of look back and see how my 19-day long dedication work has been with her, and kind of let you guys know how my relationship with her is building. But I do think she's going to be part of my pantheon. I really feel like, you know, I'm building my own pantheon of disembodied intelligences and personified deities and whatnot that I will work with. And I have a feeling, you know, I'm still pretty early on in this process, but I have a feeling that long term, Brigid is definitely going to be on my pantheon. And she is definitely going to have a place, some sort of shrine in my home long term. Definitely. I foresee that happening, and it makes sense. So the sun is setting, it's starting to get dark, the lighting sucks. I am going to link down below 2 really good videos about working with personified deity, in case it's something that you've been kind of thinking about, or if you're just starting to dip your toes into working with personified deity, because maybe you've been working just with like ancestors or just with, you know, elemental energies or something like that. I highly recommend Owlvine. A few years ago, she came out with a video talking about personified deity, which I really, really like, so highly recommend that video. I'll link it below. And then Kelly-Ann Maddox a few years ago too. Well, she has several videos about working with personified deity, but the one in particular that I'm thinking of, she talks about kind of overcoming some of the obstacles or hurdles you might feel emotionally, or intellectual hurdles you might have working with personified deity, and she kind of goes into detail about how it's just been a game changer for her, and I'm beginning to see how it's going to be a game changer for me as well. So this is a long-winded video, but I'm excited to continue working with Brigid. I'm excited to see where this goes. I've gotten so many signs and synchronicities and messages from her. It's crazy. I was never that type of person who said like, oh, I hear the goddess's voice and I channeled her all the time. I never say that kind of stuff, but I feel like that kind of stuff has been really ramping up lately. And it's crazy. Anyhow, let me know what your experiences are with working with personified deity and what your thoughts are. And if you have any good resources about Brigid, her mythology, her history, Brigid as a saint, Brigid as a goddess, anything and everything, I'm down for it. So comment below, and until next time, many blessings, and I hope that you stay safe and stay well. Bye.